Welcome to the Postgame. Michael Brooks here. Welcome each and every one of you folks. We're going to catch a little bit of this live stream from Donald Trump. We're on delay. We're going to start it from the beginning, but already, I mean, pretty wild news here, actually. I mean, we're going to kind of, you know, this is crazy and comedic on some level, but a ban for a month of travel from Europe to the United States is what I'm seeing. That's wild. So we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. We will get, obviously, to Ben Burgess and cover some other things, but let's start with what's at the top of the docket. Welcome to each and every one of you. Appreciate you all immensely. Here's Donald Trump. We can just go to, yeah.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak that started in China and is now spreading throughout the world. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic. We have been in frequent contact with our allies, and we are marshaling the full power of the federal government and the private sector to protect the American people. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. I am confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures, we will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens, and we will ultimately and expeditiously defeat this virus. From the beginning of time, nations and people have faced unforeseen challenges, including large-scale and very dangerous health threats. This is the way it always was and always will be. It only matters how you respond.
No. This is important. This is the Republican part of this. Is not about climate. This isn't about gutting public health.
At the very start of the outbreak, we instituted sweeping travel restrictions on China and put in place the first federally mandated quarantine in over 50 years. We declared a public health emergency and issued the highest level of travel warning on other countries as the virus spread its horrible infection. And taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots.
So this is a MAGA. He's going to use this.
Stephen Miller.
Yeah, this is pure Stephen Miller MAGA stuff.
Preceded by travelers from Europe.
This is a foreign virus. We can weaponize it against China and the Europeans.
I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing. These restrictions will also not apply to the United Kingdom. At the same time, we are monitoring the situation in China and South Korea. And as their situation improves, we will reevaluate the restrictions and warnings that are currently in place for a possible early opening.
By the way, China and South Korea have, by most reports I've seen, actually contained this fairly quickly.
Who have agreed to waive all co-payments for coronavirus treatments, extend insurance coverage to these treatments, and to prevent surprise medical billing. We are cutting massive amounts of red tape to make antiviral therapies available in record time. These treatments will significantly reduce the impact and reach of the virus. Additionally, last week I signed into law an $8.3 billion funding bill to help CDC and other government agencies fight the virus and support vaccines, treatments, and distribution of medical supplies. Testing capabilities are expanding
Jesus
rapidly
Christ,
day by day. We are moving
I don't know
very
if there's any
quickly.
other big news
The
in
vast
this,
majority of Americans,
I think that,
the risk is very
okay, you can give it one more.
people can expect to recover fully and quickly if they should get the virus. The highest risk is for elderly population with underlying health conditions. The elderly population must be very,
All right, so
very
yeah,
careful.
basically, he should
In
be careful because
particular,
he's
we are
looking
strongly
terrible. But
advising
let's
that
say, look. First of all, we were going to kind of do this as a comedy thing, but this is very serious. I mean, this is a MAGA speech. This is a MAGA address, and it's very difficult because there's a couple of things here, like whether or not I'm not in a position to say whether or not a temporary travel ban from Europe is a bad idea. I don't know. I don't know what that's being filtered through. So I'm not even going to comment on the policy prescription. I just know the rhetoric of foreign virus, emphasizing that it originated in China. And again, folks, look, if this thing becomes a fully blown, if we're still dealing with this in several months and it's hurt the economy, you want to look at it in just cynical electoral terms, it's very dangerous for Donald Trump. And he clearly sees that. That's why he's talking like this. However, I think that they see a lot of profit and potential. I think they see major danger and major opportunity in this from a MAGA perspective. So I think that's true. The other big things that are just really important to note, in addition to the obvious things about taking every possible personal precaution, but we have to understand this is also everything we talk about on this show. Mm-hmm. The gutting of global public health, the relentless assault on those systems, as well as the corresponding, environmental toxins and problems with, animal agriculture internationally. This is why we face this situation. And there is a question that has nothing to do, some smart people on the MAGA agenda will embrace this, but it should not be MAGA agenda. It should be a resiliency agenda, which every single country on earth should embrace. It is, in fact, insane that the United States does not have independence and state ownership. When I say independence, of course, I'm not just talking about foreign. I'm talking about private, okay? Private first and foremost. There needs to be state production of drugs. There needs to be resiliency in the drug sector, period. This is not only something that has been undermined in the United States, it's actually an implement of U.S. foreign policy on behalf of our pharmaceutical companies when we, as an example, target a country like India or a country like South Africa. We've exacerbated global health crises because of this rapacious policy, and it's also coming home. So we need to, again, proactively fight this MAGA agenda while also saying we need public expenditure on medicine. What is this tweet you got up?
Oh, this is CDC Director Robert Redfield, who's sort of a Pence hire, so probably like some history with HIV denial or something, maybe allegedly, who knows. Interesting comments from CDC Director Robert Redfield. I guess I anticipated the private sector would have engaged and helped develop for the clinical side. I can tell you, having lived through the last 8 weeks, I would have loved the private sector to be fully engaged.
Oh my God.
It's a cult.
This is, well, it's people high on their own supply, right? Because,
yes.
I mean, literally within the lifetimes of some of the older people, like the World War II post-Depression era, the idea that capitalism could actually marshal resources in a crisis like this was, everyone knew it was laughable.
A joke.
Yeah,
it's a joke.
Impossible.
Impossible. It's never happened.
What's so frightening about what's going on in the United States right now with our failure when it comes to testing. I mean, we put in this ban originally to give us time to develop tests, but we had to make our own tests. We couldn't accept the Chinese one or from other countries.
WHO.
And it created obviously massive issues because there were failures with testing. What's so frightening about that? So that's the beginning, and what we're going to see as this infection spreads. compare that to what's been going on in South Korea recently. You know, there's been a lot of cases in South Korea, but they have responded by making the testing freely available, not just to citizens, but to non-citizens. And they've said to people who are there, you know, illegally, right, you know, quote unquote illegally, whatever, that you can come in and we will not prosecute you. Anybody who needs to come forward and get tested, you know, we will take care of this, because they understand the public health crisis that is. Can you imagine Donald Trump, foreign virus that he just said, foreign virus Donald Trump having any kind of policy like that? No, I mean, like, they will let this spread to spite and to attack and weaponize it against populations.
That's exactly right. And if you look at, again, this is actually a great stark example of the three roads that we have. This will be weaponized, used to accelerate xenophobia, division, crony capitalism. Then we have Joe Biden's on television saying, I will not sign national health insurance while this is happening. And then the third position, which is we synchronize aggressive state production of vital needs to build in resiliency at state, local, and national levels. And then we also, in a common human project, collaborate with all of our partners internationally to contain something that is a collective threat. Mm-hmm. I mean, again,
what about the individual?
What about the individual? You can't clean your room out of this. So yeah, we will continue. There's a lot to pick apart with this, and I just keep wanting to balance, like, and at the same time, I actually think it is like, it's not useful to panic. It's not useful to, retreat. And the sort of political uses of panic are generally advantageous to the right. So don't panic. Mm-hmm. Clear and level-headed, but also take precautions, live your life, and recognize, again, this is another area where this struggle we are in is viscerally real. And what I think another reason I'm so internationally focused is, frankly, you go to situations that nobody should romanticize and none of us want to replicate. But one thing that people know is that shit is real. And certainly if you talk to folks, who are poor anywhere, they get it.
And just adding to this too, we're going to, again, we shouldn't panic and we shouldn't sprint into, kind of like, oh my God, this is going to be some kind of, long lasting pandemic that's going to kill lots of people. It's a frightening thing because it's a virus that's spreading very quickly and we don't have a cure for it yet. We have to keep things in perspective. But I did want to add that this is another example of the failure of markets to provide goods to people in crisis situations. There's been a lot of people, and myself included, been making fun of right-wing politicians who have been taking pictures of empty shelves in Australia, for example, right, and saying like, well, looks like socialism. Well, it's like, no, this is capitalism, because under capitalism, when you have a lot of people demanding the same good, the way that they deal with that is whoever can pay the most for that good is the one who gets it. We're seeing that happen with necessary medical equipment, with hand sanitizer, and we're also seeing it with things like toilet paper. This is a system that is the complete opposite of egalitarian. And when you need people to come together, having a market economy is by far the worst system to have because it creates unnecessary shortages, right? Like, we still have enough to provide for everybody, but instead of being able to do that, what's going to happen is a few people are going to be able to hoard the resources and to hoard the necessary goods. And then a few really cynical people are going to hoard them and then resell them at a high profit margin for themselves.
Absolutely. Let's, though, before we get to Ben Burgess, there is a politician out there who I've been told has
time
plans.
For TikTok.
It's time for TikTok.
I got a plan to do TikToks.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely TikTok
people.
time. Is this wire sticking out? Can you guys see it? Okay, cool. So I keep catching that when I watch clips, and it's very annoying. So this is a video that was put together by Cancel_Sam, who's one of the most indispensable players we got in the social media sphere. I did not, and just to be very clear, I'm going to continue to make fun of Elizabeth Warren because that's the only contribution she can. Undermining wokeness and comedy are the only good things that can come out of this campaign. And this montage, this is a real major figure in the Warren campaign. I don't know why the face is blurred out, but this really shows you the essence. You know how Bernie Sanders came out today and with just such urgency and clarity was like, look, we're in a state of emergency across the board. And I need to know what in fact, the plan is to deal with a system that tens of thousands of people die prematurely from, to deal with an ecological crisis that scientists tell us we have a finite amount of time to deal with and is already claiming so many lives and so much well-being, to deal with the war on immigrants and migrants, to deal with all of these things. And this candidate, who was always obviously not the candidate if you actually care about these things and you had any sense of history, strategy, or anything else, but that we were, oh my God, again, and I make no bones about it. Yeah, I'm personally annoyed. I had people whine at me for doing like, Elizabeth Warren, let me throw the bone. She's great. Although frankly, I guess.
Let's see some more evidence.
Yeah, let's see. I get it. You know what? And frankly, let's be really fucking blunt about this. Hating on banks and writing about bankruptcy was very good for her. Now, I'm not saying that this is like intentional, but I am saying that like doing the work she did was at zero personal sacrifice. A college professor with very limited political talent became a United States senator and beloved by the media and progressive community for a very narrow set of things. And people would say like, oh, don't criticize her. Same side. If you wanted us to be in a position where we should primarily focus on Joe Biden, that would be fantastic. And that would mean that we're several years ahead in terms of our influence and power. But the show like this needed to focus on the delusion of Warren. And anyways, I'm getting pissed off. Let's watch this video. It's pretty funny.
Negotiating with Democrats.
Hold on, sorry. We got extra sound.
Oh, extra sound. All right. We're going to go to it in just a moment.
Was about the selfie line. The time I remember most vividly disagreeing with her was about the selfie line.
I will stay as long as you want, and we'll do selfies forever.
And I said, no, we can't do that. And she said, why? I'm gonna get Timothy forever, and you're gonna be tired, and it's gonna be exhausting.
Boy, we must be crowding in soon on about 35,000 selfies. You know? Oh, selfies. That's what democracy is now.
Yeah.
Should have done 70,000 selfies, which must be the new measure of democracy. Sometimes
Whose votes?
I get really worked up. And sometimes I get a little hot. I don't really mean to. What happens is when you do 100,000 selfies with people.
Thank you so much. I was like, this was the person that was like, I don't understand. How could you criticize the campaign? They've written blog posts.
It definitely doesn't say anything maybe about this psychoanalysis of this campaign, that they fetishized the evidence that they actually interacted with people and voters.
Yes.
Because they certainly didn't interact with them in the polling place.
Right. Less
Did she get more selfies than she got votes?
It's starting to look like
That
it.
might be true.
Less selfies, more votes, folks. I mean, that was another thing, because again, like she was just, I mean, you could not have asked for better coverage. I'm sure, and again, of course, she got some critical articles, whatever, but overall, writ large, nobody got a better media treatment than her. And like, the way the selfie thing was covered is either, I remember somebody in the Washington Post literally compared it to Frederick Douglass, which is maybe one of the most genuinely demented and offensive things I've ever seen in my life. And then there was a whole bunch of people that were just like, it's a little weird, but the CFPB, The CFPB, the CFPB that under Republican leadership is screwing people right now. The ideology of get things done is fused with the ideology of meritocracy to create a mirage of action that leads to nothing. And all that happened was that look, I keep emphasizing, she's just a careerist. It's fine. Most people in the professional managerial class are just careerists. Most politicians are certainly just careerists. But it is weird. I mean, it is amazing to actually see how there's a lot of politicians I could think of, obviously starting with Bernie Sanders as like a better person than all these other people, but even down to just like pretty conventional politicians who like, they suck it up. They do the endorsement. Yeah. They aren't like, I'm going on Saturday Night Live.
Warren does have 2.2 million votes this primary. Wow. So
but we don't know how many selfies though. Those are a lot of different.
Well, as of January, she was at 100,000. So I don't know if she went into super selfie mode after that. But
like, I think selfies are the measure of democracy, and my daddy said that Jews are Shylocks. That's another great one. It's like, we took so many selfies today. Ralph Abernathy said he didn't like my selfies, so I'm dropping out of the coalition. I don't owe the people of Alabama anything. I don't know who needs to hear this. But I need to engage in self-care. All right, we're going to call Ben Burgess. It'd be like, I was thinking the other day if Mandela, I forget Mandela's background. I think he was Psy. I'm forgetting the name, but he comes from a specific group. And it would be like as if he lied about it until he was 50. Like, I apologize to matriarchs in my family. I identified in that way and we wanted to carry on the tradition. And now if you don't make me president, I will quit the ANC and defect to the apartheid regime so I can engage in self-care. See you on Saturday Night Live. I'm doing a Drake dance.
Flip the switch.
Flip the switch. I owe you. I don't know who needs to hear that. All right, we'll be right back with Ben Burgess.
You've heard it before. Records all over the place, and that will continue and then some because of what we did.
What's funny is that the more I think about it, though, like Warren is actually very similar to Trump. Like, she could let like a corona, like if she was president and they didn't let her chair a G8 meeting, she might refuse to coordinate on the coronavirus response. She's like, I'm sorry, I'm engaging in self-care. I wanted to be involved. In fact, I had the best plan for the coronavirus, but I was not invited by the Japanese prime minister to do the G8 meeting chairmanship. So I'm just going to need to take some time for myself right now. Joining us now is the great Ben Burgess. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, forthcoming Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, also from Zero Books. Ben, how are you? You ready for your song?
Of course.
Let's do it. I want to go to mockery really badly.
I
Ben,
will.
So please go.
Okay.
You got to restrain me, man. I love that. Debunk all of it. Logical. You're going to show us how to argue it out.
This is based on data from a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Okay, break it down. Debunk all of it. Break it down. Debunk all of it. So, Ben, we are experiencing a public health crisis. We have a authoritarian, xenophobic president who is... I don't want to personalize incompetence to Donald Trump because the Republican Party has been trying to dismantle a social infrastructure of this country.
Yes.
And so he's going to fuse that incompetence and attempt to address that incompetence because he's terrified of the political consequences while also trying to weaponize it for his, MAGA racist agenda.
Yeah, and it is really dangerous, I think, to as tempting as it is, because Trump's so cartoonish. I think it's really dangerous to personalize it to him.
Yes.
Because that just feeds into this liberal thing of, longing for the supposedly reasonable Democrats, so the supposedly reasonable Republicans, and romanticizing, every Republican who comes along who says a bad word about Trump, which is, individuals come and go, but they're the long-term agenda of ripping down what little public health infrastructure we have isn't going anywhere.
Indeed. And speaking of which, again, Bernie Sanders is still in the hunt, and he's the person who has a policy set that would save a lot of lives normally and is indispensable from dealing with this type of crisis in the future. I want to just point out here, too, that this answer that you're about to debunk is very important, frankly, for really emphasizing that these folks do have an ideology. If they were just technocrats, they would say, you know what? The polls are starting to look decent for Medicare for all. Yes, it can be demagogued. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, the insurance company will spend trillions of blood money to undermine it. But there's a base there of people that support it. And, I'm trying to do efficient government here. We can't keep doing this. We can't have such a dangerous public health system. Everybody needs to be covered. Here's how Joe Biden responded to Lawrence O'Donnell. And again, we'll debunk it, but I want you to actually see this as not just sort of the incoherence of the incoherent, but actually as an expression of pretty strong ideology.
No question. Let's flash forward. Your president, Bernie Sanders, is still active in the Senate. He manages to get Medicare for all through the Senate in some compromised version, the Elizabeth Warren version or other version. Nancy Pelosi gets a version of it through the House of Representatives. It comes to your desk. Do you veto it?
I would veto anything that delays providing the security and the certainty of health care being available now. If they got that through and by some miracle, and there was an epiphany that occurred, and some miracle occurred that said, okay, it's passed, then you got to look at the cost. I want to know, how did they find the $35 trillion? What is that doing? Is it going to significantly raise taxes on the middle class, which it will? What's going to happen? Look, my opposition isn't to the principle that you should have Medicare. Everybody, health care should be a right in America. My opposition relates to whether or not, A, it's doable, two, what the cost is, and what the consequences for the rest of the budget are. How are you going to find $35 trillion over the next 10 years without having profound impacts on everything from taxes for middle class and working class people, as well as the impact on the rest of the budget?
Okay, Ben. First of all, before you debunk this, can you be as mentally acute as that?
Honestly, for Biden, that was relatively together.
That's true.
He didn't start saying, oh, I don't know how it's going to impact the rest of the thing, the thing. But no, he is just jamming together every misleading health insurance industry lobby, propaganda lie, and bad argument that there is. So just to take it from the top, this is the least of it, but I think this is a good thing to kind of train ourselves to notice. When he says 35 trillion, right? Which, by the way, I think he's getting from the Mercatus Center, which is a Koch brothers funded think tank, which famously trumpeted that number because it sounded so big. Right. And disguised the fact that even according to their own findings, Matt Brunig caught them out on this, even according to their own findings, that was actually less than the total of healthcare spending under the current system for the next 10 years. But when he says 35 trillion, now, of course, the actual annual cost is a lot because healthcare is a huge sector. It costs a ton of money regardless of what kind of system you have, right? That, like, whether you are having people pay in premiums and copays and deductibles and that's how you're financing it, right? Or you're having people pay taxes and that's how you're financing it. Either way, ridiculously massive sums of money are passing through someone's hands because healthcare is incredibly expensive. Of course, people say, oh, it's bigger than the entire federal budget or whatever. Yeah, it's a big sector of the economy that would now be nationalized, the health insurance sector. But when you say 35 trillion, it's such a stupid game that you're playing because what you're doing, what he means, and he didn't even bother to say this in the clip, but if pushed, presumably, what he might remember to say is that's 35 trillion over the course of 10 years, right? Anytime there's some proposed government spending that you want to make sound just ridiculously massive, the trick everybody always does is instead of doing the normal thing of saying what it'll cost per year, they'll just say what it'll cost per decade so they can move the decimal place one over.
Right.
It's such a cheap trick. You might as well say, oh, it's going to cost $350 trillion over the course of the next century.
Right. I'm surprised they don't, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when he says, oh, I would veto anything that would threaten the security of getting health care right now, to the extent that I could follow what his thought is even supposed to be there. I think this is just the fear-mongering about, oh, you'll lose the health insurance that you have, right? Because otherwise, I don't even know. I mean, he's not even expressing a proposition. I literally don't know what he means unless he's just sort of trying in a fumbling way to express that thought. But of course, this is an equivocation, right? Losing the health insurance you have now, meaning you lose your health insurance and you have to go through this horrible process that we all hate of switching to new health insurance, finding a new in-network doctor, all of that shit, right? That everybody has been through, right? Even if you're a middle-class person with good health insurance, it's an incredibly stressful process. Everybody hates it for good reason. And so we all have this kind of Pavlovian reaction to hearing that phrase, lose your health insurance, because you're imagining something like that happening, even though what it actually means is that health insurance is being paid for through the public treasury rather than through this rent-seeking middleman parasitical private company. That, in fact, not only are you not going to have to go through this process, but you'll never have to go through it again because Medicare for all would mean that there's a single payer, so you're never going to have to transition from one payer to another with all the stress that goes through that again. And the only way to go out of network is to leave the country, which I guess in the era of coronavirus we can't do anyway. And then finally, when he says, how are you going to find the money, the $35 trillion? This is the biggest, normally I'm not crazy about people using terms like gaslighting when they talk about politics, but I have to say it kind of fits that because the media and the centrist candidates and now the one remaining centrist candidate, Biden, have told us so many times that Bernie is being like evasive about how to find the money.
Yeah.
Total nonsense. Yeah. In fact, at all the debates, right? This used to be when Warren was in the debates and everything. This used to be this really tedious thing because they'd spend like the first half hour of every debate interrogating Warren about, whether she'd be willing to raise middle-class taxes, and she'd go through this weird evasive dance about it. And then finally, when they got around to letting Bernie talk, he'd be like, yeah, of course, middle-income taxpayers would pay more, but they'd save money overall. Right. Because, of course, when you are pooling together everybody's, and the money that people are spending on health insurance, when you're pooling that together in a public fund with no middleman who has to like extract their piece of it, right? That's a more efficient thing, right? You don't have to take as much from anybody. That's about as obvious and intuitive as something about, funding for a government program could possibly be. So obviously the answer to where do you find the money is, well, first of all, the best answer is, soak the rich, scale back the overseas empire, et cetera. But even if you're not going to do anything like that, right? Even if you have a pretty regressive tax to pay for it, most people, pretty much anybody who's not rich, right, is going to be saving some money on this just because it's a more efficient way to do it.
That's it. Yeah, I'm reminded I'm with the ANC on liberation. I'm with them. 3 months later, it's like, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know who I mean, F.W. de Klerk was very nice to me.
It is amazing, right? I've got to say that Elizabeth Warren spent like a year, 2 years presenting herself as an advocate of Medicare for all. Presumably, a lot of the people who supported her for those 2 years and sent her money instead of sending Bernie Sanders money, wasted their votes on her on Super Tuesday. Presumably, a lot of those people believed her. And now, faced with, whatever, not that it even matters anymore, but faced with a choice between a candidate who lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes Medicare for all and one who literally says he would veto it if it passed the House and the Senate, she needs some time to herself. And Elizabeth Warren, she doesn't owe these men anything.
Least of all, Annie Barkin. He's always wheeling around and bothering me. And everyone's like, oh, he endorsed, he laid all his credibility on the line, and you're making him look like an absolute jackass. And I said, first of all, excuse me, I don't know who you are while we're talking. And secondly, you need to ask my permission before you download information like that. And third of all, I'm going to be in major self-care, and I don't know you or Wheelchair Man anything.
Yeah, no, or the tens of millions of people without health insurance. Apparently, she doesn't know them anything.
Well, did they vote for me? I can guarantee you there's at least several people that I did a selfie with that didn't have health care. So, delivered.
I really, I really just want to see, like, if you could do, the Rick and Morty device to watch TV in alternate universes. Like, I really want to see the TV news, the MSNBC in the version of reality where Biden wins the nomination, and then Bernie says that he's going to have to think about whether to endorse Trump.
I'm not
going to spend some
I'm not in a space where I could talk really, even process this emotionally. So, to be clear, I don't owe you anything. That would work very well. Ben Cohen can write an essay in The Atlantic about, like, it was very hard for the Jewish psyche. All right. Ben Burgess, as always, we appreciate you. Become a patron of Ben's great page. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right, folks. I'm going to try. It's not going to be many, but I'm going to call into the system. We'll take maybe a few calls. We'll also, are we hunting for some Discord questions, guys?
I can look for some. Do you want to watch?
Is there anything else?
So C-SPAN kept running on the end of Trump's address here.
Oh, that's
kind
perfect.
Of a little bit of a
can I have some Adderall?
Candid look at Trump. Yeah,
can I have some?
It is kind of like that.
All right, let's watch this. This is Candid Trump.
we're clear.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
That was so good.
That's awesome. Hey, I think that was good.
Okay.
Fine. 646-247-3920.
Please use no speakerphone and give your one.
All right. We'll take, let me actually, and then we're going to get to this Yang thing in a second. There is something going on with this call, I must say. There is something tricky about the call system at the moment. I see them, but I don't see me. Okay. All right. Let's take a quick call out of the gate. Just do a few. You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
Hello. Is that what?
Yeah,
Can hear you well. Is this Dave from Jamaica?
Yes, this is he. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing what I can do, brother. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I was thinking about what to call about, but I think I'll give you a little breaking news. I think COVID-19 has reached my little island as well, so
I'm sorry.
That's fun. Yeah,
that's fun. That's nice. That's great. I'm sure the World Bank and IMF games that they played on Jamaica are very helpful for dealing with it.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else, Dave, on your mind? Do you want to make fun of Dave Rubin or something?
I would, but a bit of a sore throat, so no ideas there. But did I tell you about the story of my little adventures through New York immigration?
No. What happened?
Oh, so, the usual thing. If you're coming from our areas, you're going to get a hard time. So they threw all the clothes out, the luggage and whatnot. And then, looking for drugs and whatnot.
Right.
And then they'd take you to the private room where I got the most bizarre set of questions. Like, the typical, how much you earn, why are you wearing those gloves, how do you afford that ticket with how much you earn, and that type of stuff. But I think the weirdest one is, where do you work and spell it? I think that I'm not sure that's regular questing protocol.
Where do you work and spell it?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah. Or why is this number not listed? And I was like, that's my mother's number. And they're like, then why didn't you label it mother? I'm like, what?
Jesus Christ.
And I think my favorite one is so you play games, right? Yeah. How did this game end? I'm like, what? They asked me like literally, how did The Witcher 3 end or something? Like, wow. So
should tell him it's a really long game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's I don't know what if that. I guess the broader question is, how is this if you're trying to stop drugs or whatever, how is this an efficient way of doing that other than just annoying random people?
Honestly, like I look, obviously we go to the obvious points about, race and geography for sure. But like, I honestly think, and I'm talking like just even going, and honestly, like whatever, God bless the people at airport security. Those are terribly paid jobs. They're, whatever. But like, I think there is some element of justifying budgets and security theater to all of it. To all of it. I mean, and I'll tell you, it was really weird. I remember a couple times when I was traveling to Trinidad, I got stopped twice and pulled into and told to turn off my phone and all that stuff. And I think actually what happened was I think in that case, I think basically they kept asking on both occasions it happened. They kept asking me if I was from Queens. And I think that actually I shared a name or a birthday or something with somebody that they might have actually been specifically looking for. But it's just, I don't know. I look, it's so, I find it, And again, I think this is actually the type of thing where you could make a lot of hay. It's not a question of like not having a border or not having immigrate. We're not going into now, especially now. We cannot go into utopia zones at the moment. We have to be pretty grounded. But on the other hand, to tell people and make them realize just how shameful and embarrassing it is how the United States handles this, even relative to many other comparable countries. It's ridiculous.
I'm not even. I'm as you know, I'm not like the super sensitive type, but I find it more
disgusting. I mean,
I'm more galled by the inefficiency of it. Like, if I move, let's say if I was a drug kingpin, right, and you really want to stop drug movements, they ain't sending it through the fucking airport.
No, I know. No, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. No, it's total. I mean, yeah, I don't even. Right, it's nonsense. Dave, I'm sorry you went through it, but it was amazing having you in studio and great having you on the show. And we are both undertaking research together for TMBS in Jamaica. So,
wink, wink,
wink, wink. All right, brother. Thank you so much, as always. All right. Good night. All right, folks. Let's talk about Andrew Yang. So Andrew Yang, I, in this show, was extremely critical of in the beginning. And one of the things that I'm honestly self-assessing, and people, be comfortable with contradictions, because we're all contradictions and we're all imperfect and we're all learning and we're all refining. So even as I will go on a tear absolutely correctly against Elizabeth Warren as an example, I'm questioning. I think the critiques of Tulsi as an example, particularly with regards to India, 100% on point. I think, to be honest, of all the three people that people kept telling me were in it in a way that was going to at least help Bernie or not be adversarial to him, Tulsi Gabbard is the only one that ever actually had Bernie's back. So I'm going to have to give a big credit where credit's due there. And then also the broader question of like, what is the relationship between people who support a candidate and what is a candidate speaking to versus them and their own program? And I realized later on, I think that, Andrew Yang is actually speaking to some very important things for certain groups of young people. And I regret that we didn't do it in such a way that could communicate with some of the people that might be communicatable to. I think a lot of his gang is, it's just like kind of stands and whatever for anybody else. Yeah, I mean, they're just goofy and, they're going to always complain and whine about everything and never accept any, actual criticism. But, fair enough. So I wish, and I still hope that people who were intrigued by Andrew Yang, that I and we had spent more time critiquing him, but situating why he would be appealing, and then really clearly explaining why, that if you had any type of, at least, obviously progressive commitment, you need to stop fucking around with Yang and focus on Sanders. And I make no apology for that, because these are real things and real choices. Andrew Yang has gone and worked in CNN, which again, I don't begrudge him. That's fine. Most of his commentary on CNN have been, from what I've seen, have frankly just been like absolutely exceedingly conventional CNN stuff. People are worried in swing districts about Sanders, very, Bernie's angry, Biden's empathetic, it's very empathetic to make people unable to discharge their medical bills through bankruptcy. So, nothing about Andrew Yang. I thought Andrew Yang might endorse Bloomberg for a minute. I think there's nothing about him as an individual. And again, as polemical as I am, even with Warren, it's not that I think Andrew Yang is just a guy who's getting ahead, and that's whatever. That's that's most people. That's all of us to one degree or another. But when you start mixing that with somebody that people are talking about as some great humanitarian hero, when their actual policy packages, they oppose Medicare for all. Depending on the platform, it's not clear, but on some platforms, they very strongly indicate that their goal with this $1,000 a month is to phase out significant parts of the broader social safety net, overtly opposes increasing the minimum wage, and everything they've said on foreign policy, from Julian Assange to Israel-Palestine, is appalling. And and you can't deal with that critique because, you think he's a nice person or something, or all you can see is the idea of $1,000 a month, which is great. Sure, if it's on top of other things, that's a problem. And now Andrew Yang has endorsed Joe Biden. Let's play that real quick. Are we all right with it?
I believe that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, and I've always said I'm going to support whoever the nominee is. So I hereby am endorsing Joe Biden to be not just the nominee for the Democratic Party, but the next president of the United States. And I say this, having supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, Bernie was an inspiration for me, inspired my run. But the math says Joe is our prohibitive nominee. We need to bring the party together. We need to start working on defeating Donald Trump.
So let's be very clear. I think there was one element that Yang was inspired by Bernie about, which is the idea that there's a huge amount of seriously disaffected young people and working people who are on the losing end of our current arrangement, and that in a way, material answers to material questions. Now, it was absolutely antithetical to Bernie because it was not about power. It was not about a comprehensive answer to those solutions. It's like that meme where one guy, a bubble above his head says emerging class consciousness. And then some guy comes along, kind of looks like Kenny Powers, and says, how about you take $1,000 to fuck off? And that, again, intentionally or not, I already know how many, folks will get triggered, but please try to actually listen a little bit. That the answer was none of the big questions can be dealt with. We can't reform technology and subordinate it to democratic will, as an example. Capitalism is just going to happen, and maybe we can give you $1,000, but we can't even give you healthcare, clearly, as an example. And again, the idea that people took the spin that Medicare for all just meant a positive intention towards people having healthcare was it's just embarrassing, but it's also disturbing. I mean, let me put on my IDW hat here. Things mean things. Medicare for all has a meaning. And even if you want to get into Australia does it differently and it's more similar, or
it's a disaster.
Yeah, first of all, Australia is not remotely as successful as comprehensive systems like the UK. But even there, even the closest analogs you could have to the United States, which are, by the way, the worst performers on these global systems, you're already getting into a realm of government involvement of which none of these people, and certainly not Yang, from anything I read or heard, was seriously proposing. And the last point I'll make is not only shouldn't you be surprised about him endorsing Biden, and he wasn't helpful of Bernie during the campaign, obviously, but I think this is what you will see. You already are seeing on MSNBC and assorted outlets, after demonizing, after calling people who are fighting for basic dignity brown shirts, after doing everything we can to defame, lie about Bernie Sanders, to smear and lie and defame his supporters, after saying that any type of answer to any systemic problems of poverty, inequality, and ecology in this country are never going to happen, and hope and everything is dead. Now we're freaked out about youth turnout. Now we're freaked out. Now all of a sudden we realize, hey, we can constantly disrespect these people. We've dedicated our professional lives to harming them, and in many respects, literally, as lobbyists. But whoa, Joe's looking super old, and Hillary didn't figure it out. And what the hell are we going to do now? The SOP. I will not be surprised if when Joe Biden starts to kind of wheel out the, I'm actually here and cognizant tour, I think he might propose a test version of UBI. And I think that the politics, that what the elite see in Andrew Yang is the settlement that they will want to make with a post-industrial future. It's not labor unions. It's not power. It's certainly not systemic answers to wealth concentration and obscene inequality, and it's certainly not actual systems accountability for the powerful. It is, how can we sop you enough and satiate you enough that you can consume on a basic level and be okay. And like all these other things we always say, yeah, that's nicer than we'll throw you to the wolves. But it is not power, it's not dignity, and it is not a fundamental answer to any of the contradictions we're dealing with. And I'll just say, and then open it up. I've seen the one thing that I could take that actually would bother me when people would say that we were privileged for saying this. And I could tell you that I've lived most of my life in either objective real poverty or like serious lower middle class living. And I completely understand the urgency of needing cash. But I also see that if you start to strip the whole infrastructure around that cash, it means less and less and less. If you don't have rent control, it means less and less. If you don't have health care, it means less and less. And if you are turning over the keys to our future to a handful of tech monopolies that you say cannot have a wealth tax, that can't be meaningfully regulated, and in exchange is a relatively small amount of money, which will already disproportionately help folks in areas with a lower cost of living, that is not the way of a dignified future. And I hope people can let go of whatever emotional attachments they have about Andrew Yang or even interest in UBI. Let's not demonize UBI. You're interested in UBI as part of the whole kind of package. Great, cool, whatever. I honestly don't care. But don't fall for this game.
Oh, I just wanted to also hit on something about Andrew Yang's past too that I think gives you a lot of a stronger explanation for why we've been so hesitant about his ideas for UBI. You know, what Yang did before he ran for president is he ran a nonprofit called Venture for America. And that idea was very technocratic, top down. It's a pretty old thesis that the problem with struggling cities across the United States is that they just don't have enough smart young kids staying around to build businesses there, right? So his idea was that he would go to the top schools in the country and he would offer well-performing students a fellowship where they would give them funding to start, to make their tech startup in New Orleans or Baltimore instead of going to San Francisco, New York, or LA, right? And it was a massive success with investors and billionaires. He spoke to Obama. He gave TED Talks.
Yep.
He promised that he was going to make 100,000 jobs. Didn't come anywhere near that.
Sounds like his presidential campaign.
Oh, seriously. I mean, it's like, they promised to make 100. I know it was less than 4,000 jobs that was created through this fellowship, and they had hundreds of fellows. And the ones who succeeded and they had a startup that was successful, got off the ground, today, the majority of those startups are in Los Angeles, New York, or San Francisco, and we have not seen any revitalization.
People in the Midwest.
And I'm not trying to blame Andrew Yang for trying something and having it fail. What I am trying to articulate and point out is that Andrew Yang is a very enthusiastic person who I think genuinely, on a certain level, does want to do something. He sees problems that he wants to do something about it, but he is very comfortable, for example, cozying up to billionaires in Las Vegas, right, to get investment money, to help out people at the top, well-performing students, to try to enact changes top-down rather than bottom-up, right? This is somebody whose worldview is flipped from ours, where we're trying to empower people. We don't want, so for example, like UBI, his UBI is basically set up to stop people from starving, right? But it is predicated on the idea that there will always be people living in poverty. Our vision of the world is that we don't want to have a society where people are living in poverty. And that's the fundamental difference from a kind of Yang perspective and from what we're doing. And you can see it in the projects that he's worked on in the past too, why that kind of short-sightedness when it comes to empowerment is not a model that actually is able to implement the kind of changes that he wants to see.
Absolutely.
It's amazing the panic now that Joe has caught Bernie. I saw somebody said they were on a Joe Biden sort of Facebook page and we're expecting it to be jubilant, and instead it's everybody freaking out because they're not going to be able to get the youth vote.
We crushed their dreams. We voted in overwhelming numbers to make their lives terrible. How can we get their vote now?
Yeah, here's Tapper. This was from Tuesday night.
Completely frank, I'm getting real 2004 vibes tonight, which is Democrats want to defeat an incumbent Republican so badly, Democratic voters, I mean, that they decide which one is electable, and they decide, okay, it's John Kerry, or in this case, it's Joe Biden, There's a huge coalescing around that person. They want to end the primary process as soon as possible. And then
the only thing I'd change so far is like I don't like how he puts this on the voters. This is clearly party machinations.
Yeah,
but
no
whatever.
kidding.
basically they coronate this person. Now, what did we learn in the last few weeks? Mark McKinnon, former George W. Bush advisor, told me that actually they feared Howard Dean more because Howard Dean, even though he was less predictable, there was a starker difference between Howard Dean and George W. Bush, and he was drawing much bigger crowds than John Kerry was able to. And Howard Dean, we had him on the Sunday show, and Howard Dean said, "Now you tell me." But the point is that when you have the Democratic electorate deciding that they are all a bunch of Rachel Maddows and Chris Hayes and the like, that they're just, you know.
Well, here's the problem is Maddow, right? Like, no, I mean, look, undoubtedly the Democratic electorate took a signal from the overwhelming establishment formation around Joe Biden.
Which, if they would have, in some weird reality, have been able to do that around Bernie Sanders,
yeah, then they
would have voted for him.
Absolutely. All right, folks, only one more call because we have one other story and a few Discord questions to get to, but we cannot go late tonight as we have been going. We have to end a bit closer to time. All right, final call tonight. You're calling from an 832 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
How's it going? This is Demetrius in Houston.
Hey, Demetrius, what's on your mind?
How's it going? Yeah, man, I just wanted to call in and just talk to y'all about, like, I just really like that concept that y'all been talking about all night, is that idea of Machiavellian spirituality, and I guess you're pulling that from Dr. King's concept of like love and power. And
Yep.
I just think that everything that's going on, I really appreciate you guys covering the stuff with the coronavirus. I'm someone who currently I work at the county hospital here in Houston, and we have patients who have it, and Memorial Hermann here in Houston just recently stopped taking in people because there are actually workers there who contracted it there as well. And I think that point of view you talking about compassion is necessary because, I'm a worker and I'm overhearing nurses, taking N95 respirator masks, hoarding it for themselves when, other people need it. And just taking hand sanitizer and going to the grocery store and there's no water and there's no soap and people just panicking about the whole thing. And I think that just, if we had that spiritual current of compassion, of just, trying not to just think about ourselves and our family members, but other people's family and stuff like that. So I just wanted to call in and just thank you guys for talking about that, and just I would love to hear y'all go more into that sort of idea of just more of this stuff about spiritual stuff, about just caring about other human beings, because I mean our government, our public health system, like you said, is trash. I see it as someone who works at the hospital, and it's just if we don't even just try to look out for one another, it's only going to get worse. So I just want to call in and say that I appreciate that and hope that y'all just keep covering it the way that y'all have been.
Let me just say real quick before you go, I salute you and thank you. And it is something. I mean, we're going to be doing a lot more with Joshua Kahn as an example and exploring that interaction. And some people get allergic to the word spirituality. I especially with those things, I always say I really don't care one way or another. But I will say that it's certainly not exclusive of religious belief, and it's also not dependent on religious belief. But I am just struck more and more and more that there's so many situations I see where on one hand, even inside the left, but even more broadly, there's this savagery, there's this fanaticism, there's this cruelty that is totally unproductive and stupid and repulsive and looks bad and doesn't help us. And then on the other hand, there's this softness and there's this indulgence and there's this, oh, well, we lost, but we did the right thing. And we need to overcome that. And among many models I see, but when you, and there is, again, if you read, and you don't have to accept any beliefs, but it's in there. These sort of paradoxes are explored in, some Buddhist or Hindu or Christian or Islamic or Jewish texts, as an example. And you look at that Dr. King thing, yes, he put it beautifully. That the notion that love without power is sentimental and anemic, power without love is reckless and abusive, and as Cornel West will always say, that these impulses are all in ourselves. We have to recognize that dichotomy and have the ability to forgive and reconcile in ourselves, and then expand that outwards. Because the other paradox that we're dealing with is that, like, this is such a great example of what we are biologically programmed to view. And I don't like to over rely on, maybe whatever, who knows if it's in our biology or not, but we are trained through capitalism, through consumerism, maybe through some of our instincts, maybe. Although obviously we have other instincts we can expand on. But, it's rational if you have the solitary view of humanity that we're each in little pods, sure, steal those masks, hoard that medication. Yes. And in addition to not having the humanity with your fellow people, it's ridiculous. Good luck. Good luck. And yes, and by the way, I'm not minimizing, it's disgusting. That behavior leads people to lose their lives. It's sick. It's horrible behavior. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to work. I mean, that's the thing. It's like there is even the most grotesque, like Silicon Valley plutocrat version of I am going to build a bunker and let the rest of the world die. I got to tell you, I don't have that much confidence that the people who are physically constructing those bunkers are going to be so sanguine if the shit hits the fan and they're like, oh, well, me and my wife or my sister or somebody, we get to come, but not our grandparents, not our uncle. And what about their relatives? Wait, like, what the fuck are you saying? Maybe we ought to dig this thing out and throw you out into the, into the radiation zone. So it's both a highest calling of our aspirations, and it's also real. So Demetrius, please hang in. Thanks a million. You're the final call tonight. Glad we talked to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good night. Be well. All right, folks. Are there any Discord questions?
Here's
all right,
one of them from Waterboat from Kashmir. The gig economy gets no sick time off. What about them? Uber, Lyft drivers have bills to pay, and many have families to feed. Yeah, Uber and Lyft drivers are definitely going to go into work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and service workers and people at Walmart and Columbia and Yale and Harvard, I think, or maybe not Yale, but I know
the Ivy League is shut down. Really
the Ivy Leagues are shut down. I know the CUNYs aren't. So there you
go. We got, let's see here. From Warlord Zin, what do you say to people who on the left who are jumping on board with the idea of voting third party? Do you think that's a valid strategy to show discontent with Dems?
So I think that's in the main a boring kind of conversation for me.
It's frankly too electoral focused.
It's too electoral focused, I think. Now, here's what I would say. And I think it would have needed to be a different dynamic, and I don't know how this works. I said this to the Majority Report earlier. This is what I'm struggling with. People on the left, Bernie Sanders is a paramount example of this. He more than anybody in modern politics cares about human beings. I mean, again, Elizabeth Warren, we've been for a year, great progressive, whatever. She could have one temper tantrum about her career arc and she, fuck you, right? Bernie Sanders cares about people. That's why he's out doing multiple events with a, ungrateful sociopath like Hillary Clinton. And you go back to other examples. 2009, when the Obama administration was killing the public option, there was a minute where the Progressive Caucus, filled with plenty of hacks and with not amazing politics, but they said, no, you don't get our votes for an industry giveaway bill that doesn't control costs and protect middle-class families. We're not voting for it. Now, on the other end of that fight is Joe Lieberman saying, unless you get rid of a public option, I'll kill it. And you know the difference between those two people is Joe Lieberman could give a fuck if innocent people die because they don't have health care. The Progressive Caucus has people that care. Bernie Sanders takes defeating Donald Trump more seriously than any of these assholes in the liberal intelligentsia or the Democratic Party. He's the only one who means it when he talks about how disgusting and dangerous Donald Trump is. All the rest of them have no... I would guarantee you behind the scenes, some of them are like, fundraising's pretty good. They don't care. And the ones who maybe do care are so delusional, I don't know if they know how to do it anyways. So I think if Bernie Sanders had a block of voters, which frankly he does, and he said, look, I can tell you several million people ain't going to vote for you unless Nina Turner's the vice president. And I'm not, because again, we're not going back to 2016. It was a progressive platform shit. I'm talking real shit. Staffing, policy changes, vice president. If you don't do that, I will instruct them, do some type of sinister code word. Like I will instruct them to follow their conscience, right? I think that's interesting. And I think, frankly, it's the conversation at some point we need to entertain because these margins, like, like Bill Fletcher Jr., who I admire enormously. He hit me the other day when I said, by the way, I live in New York. I don't plan on voting for Joe Biden. That's fine, right? You live in Alabama. You don't plan on voting for Joe Biden. That's fine. And he said, there's really important things like the court and the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. And and by the way, anybody who would dismiss what he's saying is wrong. That's totally true. That's absolutely true. And we are at a point where I'm just starting to legitimately ask if, like, okay, but we're literally running the clock on shit. Like, literally. And you have a guy who they're going to hoist who is saying, it's not just that he opposes Medicare for all. He's saying in a fantasy world where Nancy Pelosi whipped it through the Senate, through the House, and the Senate passed it, he'd still not sign it. I mean, that's a tectonic plate shift. He's still saying no to. I don't know. Now, I will say really clearly, I still maintain, I'm open to being convinced otherwise, maybe, I still maintain if you live in a swing state, it's a very important thing to not have Donald Trump have a second term. And I do think the conversation gets way too electoral. I don't know what that answer is, because then the other thing, then it becomes the revolution fantasy. And if we don't have the material conditions in place to muscle through a great social democratic candidate who has the obvious programs and a good campaign and is a good person, I'm sorry, bad news. If there's a outbreak of kind of insurrectionary energy, it's not coming from the left right now. So these are the questions on a much bigger level that we need to explore. And that is actually why there's going to be more Zizek, there's going to be more Gramsci, there's going to be more Cornel West, because we have to think about how to dislodge these systems. And clearly there's a lot we don't know. There's also, on the other hand, going to South Carolina and doing the Medicare campaign. If I lived in Pennsylvania or Michigan or wherever, I would never vote in such a way that would facilitate Donald Trump being president. That's my view. I'm not going to do a lot of work for the Democratic Party to corral you, but I don't think, I just don't, because again, even that choice is really simple. I'm willing to have that argument with somebody for a few minutes. I check in with myself. I'm being honest in my gut. I'm willing to have that argument with somebody for a few minutes. If they live in a swing state, I think Donald Trump, it's very important, is not president. I do. And I think it's a 10-minute conversation. I think the bigger questions, even the question I had before of like, what would it actually look like to create, that's what I mean. That's a Machiavellian move that the left is inhibited in because of its kindness, frankly. And I don't even think we're there with it. If Bernie ran a different kind of campaign and had a different kind of disposition, that's what I would be advocating, to be really blunt with you. I would be saying, we have 10 million people. We have 5 million people. Hell, maybe it's only 300,000 people by the time we get to voting day. But as we all know, 80 could throw an election. And if you don't give us vice president, single pay, and they'll say, hey, but we share the, and I'll say vice president, single payer and staffing. And they'll say, you're being unreasonable, Donald Trump, vice president, single payer and staffing. That's what I would do if I was running the play, but I'm not running the play.
I now call on all Bernie bros to commence with the Menica maneuver.
Exactly. I, Bernie Sanders, call for a complete and total shutdown on voting for Democrats. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open for that. I mean, I think, yeah, Bernie's conciliatory nature. I tweeted out earlier that the Democrats are going to call him divisive, especially as long as he stays in this against Biden. But the truth is that in 2016, he said, I don't care about your damn emails. He could have probably torched Hillary with that. And this time he's going soft on Joe too, and he's gone soft on Warren. I said last fall that he should go hard at Warren, because if you want to make her look like the compromised candidate she is, you can't have her pretending to be this radical leftist. Whatever, they didn't do that.
Well, and
either.
also she should just be kneecapped out of the gate because she's the competition,
and she's taking his endorsements,
and she's letting careerists put bullshit ahead of a serious campaign.
And he's not. That's not Bernie.
No.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is when it comes to Bernie Sanders. I mean, you know. I think the point that you made hits the nail on the head is that if we're not organized in one kind of unitary fashion, then, you know, your vote, if Bernie Sanders isn't on the ballot, for example, your vote then just becomes like, you know, some kind of personal expression. I know everyone has different feelings about that. I don't know. Fundamentally for me, I think that when it comes to larger politics for our movement, they're going to blame us no matter what.
There's no doubt about that.
Even if there isn't a third party candidate that comes anywhere close to winning votes, there's no kind of Michigan situation, that happened. They're just going to say, "Oh, the youth didn't come out to vote." Right? They'll find an excuse, even if it's not being registered.
All of that is stipulated.
So I don't think that it matters on that level. And then the other point for me is it's just like at a certain point, I think we fetishize this moment a little bit too much. I don't think that it matters. If, for example, in 2016, when Hillary Clinton went up against Donald Trump in an election that was very pivotal to like the history of our nation. If Hillary Clinton had so many people who were unable to vote for her, that's the failure of the Democratic Party at that point. It's like I don't find it to be interesting or even worthwhile to come after those voters, because I'm sorry, if you can't win those voters, then you lose. You lost them. That's the fundamental.
Let me also just and I've been plenty critical of the Green Party and Jill Stein and all that, and that's another thing that frankly, I take say 40-30% of that back. Maybe even more.
Can I just, as somebody who, I voted in D.C. and I voted Green Party, I can just say one thing: is the Green Party is an absolute disaster.
Yeah,
it's
Green
not an
Party,
organization that I find to be particularly interesting, or anything like that. So I think that there is definitely a lot of disillusionment to be had on some people who think that that's going to be some kind of vehicle of change.
The thing is like, I will just keep saying this until you get, and maybe. The thing that I always come into a quandary with third parties, which I just still have not been convinced by, is one, if you want a serious third party presence, you need to do major electoral reform. If you put all the energy into doing major electoral reform and you have a third party, then you still come to the dynamic that we're in a capitalist economy. And there is not a single, no, look, of course, a social base of a party matters. And absolutely the fact that America has not had a direct labor party is a problem. And it could be very important on a state level to even just have a presence that, like, even if we're not running that many candidates or whatever, that this is clearly, and again, not like some type of ancillary Democratic Party project or something, but a labor party. I want to talk to Adolf more about the project in South Carolina. But capitalism is still capitalism. And this is where I come to I still have not been talked out of my dialectic, which is there's politics outside of electoralism, which could get extremely radical. And that's a whole other domain. I don't know. I see a lot of lack of strategy and romanticism in that area too, but it's still there. And, trade unionism, strikes, these types of things. And I still have not seen the electoral answer to quote unquote harm reduction that satisfies my impulse. Now, again, it's also, though, a point of emphasis. I don't agree, I don't think voting's about self-expression, whatever. But as I was saying before, look, if you voted for Elizabeth Warren, you should write the Green Party an apology. And you never in a position to lecture somebody on voting as self-expression ever again. I would say, frankly, mostly in the main, if you didn't vote for Bernie Sanders, the only people on my timeline that I will accept people making arguments about how it's privileged to not vote for the Democratic Party nominee are people that can show me receipts that they supported Bernie Sanders, because those are the only folks that have been directed by an actual concern for the vulnerable in this society in terms of their voting. I think in terms of itself, I'll just keep reiterating, you ask me, I'm in a swing state, I'll vote to prevent Donald Trump. I think that it is the job of the Democratic Party, if they want to win. And they have made clear that they, hate the progressive agenda more than anything else. And yes, the other thing that is the big hypothetical is if these conversations turn into something tangible, like Bernie Sanders is going to lead a block of several million voters that will pull the eject button without concessions, I would support that. But that's just not in play. Yeah.
Just if we're entertaining this idea for a second, I think that long-term strategy for what we need to be doing is finding a kind of balance between, what the DSA has been doing, also what Bernie Sanders did individually, right? Where the DSA runs in districts that are competitive, right? You run in the Democratic primary and you try to win that, that primary, and then you run against the Republican. I think that's still the case that you probably need to do even in places like New York, where the Democratic primary candidate just goes on to win 80% of the vote or whatever in the general. But I do think eventually continuing that strategy until we can actually have an institution like a DSA or a socialist party or some kind of organization. And I think the strategy in the end should be something like this. In areas like New York, where it's just run by the Democratic Party, you actually create a two-party system where you just run socialist candidates in every election against the Democrat. In places that are very much Republican-held, you can also do the same thing where you just run, radicals against the Republicans. And then in areas where those, districts are very much in play and in danger, you run in the Democratic primary, and then you support that party and you try to prevent the Republicans. I think that is a strategy that could be very viable. I mean, there's a lot of groundwork that would need to be done, obviously, to do it.
But the other question that comes into too, and again, this is also about strengthening the left and thinking strategically about the left. People are running great campaigns. We've interviewed some of these people, and not all of them, and we'll see, but they're losing mostly. The other dynamic here is it isn't. I think there's any number of things that we need to go back to the drawing board on. I generally agree with your approach, although I will say, you look at Vermont, that turned into the Progressive Party, and it is great. Vermont has a bit of a three-party system, but there is the realities of governing in a capitalist context, which make, a lot of progressive just, they're progressive Democrats, and some of them even run fusion tickets. So it's cool. It's nice. It hasn't upended the politics of the state.
Is that eventually there needs to be an articulation, right? And that's what we've been learning in the Democratic Party right now. There needs to be an articulation that recognizes that Nancy Pelosi and even Ilhan Omar, they're not really in the same party.
They're not in the same party.
Right? And I think that the point of one having a party is not necessarily out of a kind of I want to have a card carrying thing that means something to me. It's having more direct control over the people who are part of your movement. It's having a stronger articulation that you can have a line and strategy and voting. Because right now we have people who have certain goals, right, that they share. But it's so diverse and it's hard to organize and to act as one group when you're sort of members of this big tent party like the Democratic Party, because then everyone's eclectic. I just think that it's less about necessarily the party as in the ballot line even mattering. It's like actually just being, even if we don't even have like a socialist party, having people who say, I'm running the Democratic primary and I'm a democratic socialist, like part of a democratic socialist organization, that begins to matter a lot more, because then there's an articulation, the difference between those two ideologies.
Maybe it is important on some level. Yeah. And I honestly, I would go with the Labor Party. I think that is a very good name choice.
Oh yeah.
I think it's like a deeply honorable tradition, and I think it's, it's a good synthesis of something that isn't like a new word concept that needs to still be introduced to some folks, but still clearly, literally just says like, yeah, this party's about labor. That's the point. We're a party of every single human being that works. All right, let's do a final really quick segment. This is something I want to talk about because this actually relates to hegemony, and then we'll take a final Discord question. Gramsci is somebody we're going to be talking about a lot more. I want to talk about movements and things that have worked from across the globe, leaders that are inspiring, and I also want to talk about concepts that I think actually really are in our lives. Now, hegemony is a word that is, I think it's kind of been used into sort of irrelevance in a way. But the idea that capitalism as a practice reproduces itself through the kind of day-to-day consent of people, as mediated through institutions, as mediated through cultural networks and ideas that naturalize capitalism. I know it sounds really wordy. I wish I could make it sound simpler. But first of all, does that sound about right, guys, from your reading of hegemony? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's like hegemony. There's multiple different hegemonies in society, and you think about it more as like a liquid. Like this is a way that, like this is a abstract way of trying to hit at it that one of my philosophy professors told me that I thought made it very clear. If you think about like a cup just filled with water and you add milk to it, right, that changes the consistency of like the liquid itself, right? It doesn't make it all milk. It's like a mixture of water and milk. Then you add dye, and that turns it red, right? Like all of these things are coming into this one vessel, which is society, and there's all these different hegemonies, and then the dominant hegemony, which is like capitalism, is the dominant in our society. So even though it has different venues, for example, like in the church, in the schools, right, all these have their own ideologies, and certain groups are empowering them, there's still one dominant hegemony, and that is sort of like the battle in society, the kind of different.
And the mediating institutions, I just want to really focus on this part of it, that the mediating institutions are what. So, okay, let's take prosperity gospel. That clearly flows from capitalism. But the mediating institution of the preacher who's telling you how to pray and be rich is what naturalizes the people going to that church to be sort of move into the capitalist hegemonic orbit, right? Does that make sense? So, and this clip of Cornel West from the early 90s, where he talks about this in relation to the left in the black church, could be an example of, and also this is another key Gramscian term, that organic intellectuals, people who mediate ideas and institutions, but are not trained. They're not to the manner born. They're not, they're not Davos intellectuals. They're not on CNN, but they're working with ideas usually in different institutions and to kind of do a counter-hegemonic project. I just want to play this clip real quick.
Cornel West talks about popular Gramsciism.
Thinking about Gramsci and America and Gramsci and the world, we have to come to terms with a fundamental theme that informs all of Gramsci's work, which is that of the popular creative spirit. Raise the question of what he means by this term. And I think that you have seen some of this at work in people's creative efforts, in people's agency, making and remaking themselves and making and remaking the society and world around them. Of course, in the black tradition here in America, we see that kind of cultural agency at work within the church. You've already seen that. But we also see how it is inseparable from political struggle, inseparable from social activism.
So that's I hope those themes are kind of working there. And I really believe this is a much deeper concept to explain why people are afraid of change and why even when, look, it's cool that you go and you poll people and they say they like a particular policy idea, but when they go into that booth and they actually make that decision about what they think is safe to beat Donald Trump or deal with a crisis, it's all the things that we're talking about. All the Democratic Party aligning and giving that affirmation to Biden. That's a powerful hegemonic act. And it is almost kinesthetic. And I think folks, this is why people react when you challenge capitalism. This is why people react when you challenge wokeness. This is why people react when you challenge scientism. This is why people react when they challenge their religious fanaticism. It's in the core. And we need to figure out to interact in a way to actually dislodge it. And this is one of those things that it sounds so abstract, and I almost can't stand myself while I talk like this. But if I'm making even 1/5 of sense here, this is actually the type of work that is going to be necessary for even creating the space and the context for a Labor Party, for the projects we're talking about. So I don't know if you have anything to add. I hope I hope it made some sense.
It makes me think about another person that we've been visiting a lot. Is Zizek. Zizek has in Sublime Object of Ideology, which a lot of people are familiar with his later stuff and obviously his interviews, but that's one of Zizek's real brilliant masterworks of philosophy, and where he actually made a dent and changed the way that people were thinking. And he does Marx basically said ideology was it's that you do and you don't really know why you're doing it, right? Well, Zizek actually flipped that for our age today, where he said actually they know exactly what they're doing and they're doing it anyway. Right. And it's actually, and that's what happens when you see people who are going for Biden, well, I don't think this is actually going to change anything. There's no real possibility of anything. But, this is what we have to do. Right. That's very strong ideology. And that's actually the kind of ideological age that we're living in. It's not enough just to actually tell people that it's this is just what they want you to do. They're well, yeah, I know. And I'm still doing it. That's the task. And it's difficult to get out of that mindset and to practice politics. I mean, this is capitalist realism that, Mark Fisher, all these things are connected, and the ideology question is one that really smart people like Gramsci and Cornel West and Zizek and Mark Fisher have been working on for a long time, and we still haven't found that kind of perfect popular formula to deal with it. But it's something it's something we can't ignore anymore, honestly.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it's another paradox, right? That we urgently need action for human survival, not to mention flourishing and basic decency. But I'm also afraid that if we don't really start to think and embody, then we're just going to keep replicating. It's kind of okay, the car isn't working. Hit the gas. Well, not if the engine's fucked up. So I want to create space in this show, and we'll make it fun. We'll make it entertaining. And of course, we're going to talk about the election. Of course, we're going to, be more global than ever. But the context that I'm trying and we're trying to call upon here is, how do we actually figure out these predicaments? And then from them, generate better ideas, better ways of being, and actually win. Final Discord question, and then we'll call it a night. Still went later than I anticipated, but I'm sure y'all are happy because I think we're doing a good show.
This is more of a comment from Colleen. While I thought you had David Feldman as the first act of your Bell House live show, didn't know you managed to book Biden. And then from Dave from Jamaica, when did Tapper become Bernie bro?
That is a good question.
He's certainly not an Ilhan bro.
Yeah, he's certainly not an Ilhan bro. Indeed. F. Jake Tapper. All right. Love all of you. This Sunday, Joanna Wiest on bioessentialism and socialism. Thanks, everybody. Sorry, guys. Oh, we totally off? Guys, I'm sorry I forgot to do this. I wanted to also say on a positive note, it looks like Bolsonaro might have corona. All right, love you guys. Take care.